Hi, and welcome back to History in a Nutshell. I apologise for being away for a bit. I've had quite a bit to see to have been starting a new job. I had quite a few errands to run in the run-up to that, so I do apologise for being away for a bit. Now, we've talked about liberalism quite a bit on this channel, and just judging from the comment sections and from some of my interactions with you, that does seem to be something we're quite interested in as a community here around History in a Nutshell. Now, we've mentioned him before, but he really deserves a video in his own right. And that is Richard Cobden, perhaps the most legendary of 19th century liberals. So, an interesting background. He's born the son of a sort of small-scale farmer. Perhaps not the poorest of the poor in society. He's not a pauper. He's of relatively modest means. To cut a long story short, he becomes a travelling salesman, working out of Manchester. Basically, through that, he creates his own Sacklio printing company. Manchester, of course, being the centre of the textile industry and the northwest more broadly, not least because it's often quite rainy and quite damp here. So he becomes a self-sufficient man. He's got enough profits from his Sacklio business that he's able to become a sort of learned gentleman, if you will. He's got time on his hands, he can pursue ideas, and he can pursue politics. So, of course, the first thing that comes to mind with Cobden is, of course, the free trade movement. Richard Cobden is the public face from 1836 onwards of the Anti-Corn Law League. Now, again, we've touched on it a bit on the channel before. The Anti-Corn Law League is really significant for quite a few reasons. One that's often overlooked is that it's actually the first mass democratic movement in Britain, really. This is really the first mass participatory movement in British politics, so it's a big, big thing in and of itself. Furthermore, it's really influential on British trade policy and British economic policy in the 19th century more broadly. The Corn Laws were basically a series of agricultural laws designed to guarantee prices for landowners in Britain. So basically, there were tariffs on raw foodstuffs like corn, which guaranteed a profit to the big landed aristocracy. The downside of this was it kept prices for food very, very high. So obviously across 19th century Britain, you've got mass urbanisation and mass industrialisation. So you've got people who aren't working in agriculture, couldn't really care less about it, living in the cities, often in very, very difficult conditions, urban poverty, a really Dickensian world, and the prices for their foodstuff are kept artificially high by these tariffs that the aristocratic elite keep on them so they can make profit off their country estates, basically. So it's a big, big movement, mass mobilisation. Cobden is the public face. He's speaking at meetings, he's speaking at public demonstrations. He's a very modern political figure, though he's in the early 19th century. Ultimately, this leads to the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1839. Cobden is at his height of popularity here. He's basically saved everyone money on the food costs. We talk about the crisis of the cost of living and the cost of living crisis today. It's a similar sort of thing. He basically leaves most people in the country better off at the end of the month through getting rid of these tariffs. So, by 1839, he's at the height of his popularity, a really influential figure. He's really liked by the people. At the same time, Cobden is promoting free trade and he's opposed to tariffs. He's also consistently anti-war. And whilst you often think of Cobden as a free trade campaigner, you really can't separate his foreign policy from his economic policy. So Cobden is involved in all of the major peace conferences from 1848 through to 1852. Now, if you like, we can do a video of this in and of itself because these conferences are quite interesting. There's a lot of quite key things that come out of them. But in a nutshell, these are gatherings of learned men from across Europe, from various nationalities, from various political movements. Predominantly, they're sort of liberal Republicans and liberal nationalists, though there are some other figures in there. There are some religious figures in there. The Quakers are very much involved in them. And they're basically trying to find ways to ease tension between the different nation states and empires on the world stage to prevent war. Cobden is involved in all of these. He is really the only high-profile British figure who is. And interestingly enough, it's his peace activism that ends his public popularity in some ways. So, in 1848, there's the beginning of the Second French Republic. Napoleon III, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, basically comes to power. There's an orgy of pro-war, anti-French sentiment in Britain against Napoleon III and his young government. Cobden is actually a really key figure in speaking out against this, and instead of seeing France as a natural enemy, which is how Britain has traditionally viewed the French up until this point, he sees them as actually a natural partner. Which does make sense because we're in swimming distance of each other. So he's really quite forward-thinking there. But he goes from being one of the most popular men in Britain, who saved people money on the food costs, got rid of unpopular tariffs, he's taken on the elites, and he's defeated them in this great battle through the Anti-Corn Law League. He now becomes quite a reviled figure because of his want for peace with France. Ultimately, though, Cobden's vision is successful, and this can be seen in the Cobden-Chevalier Pact in 1860. This is basically a free trade treaty between Britain and France. Has a most favoured trading nation clause, so in essence, there's all sorts of barriers removed, there's very strong commercial ties built there. This helps both countries industrialise, because France has a lot of innovative engineering practice through the École Polytechnique. Britain has a lot of mass production, it's already very urbanised and industrialised by this point, and so they can both use their comparative advantage. It's a win-win for both countries. It's a real crowning glory for Cobden's diplomacy. Of course, in a funny way, Cobden is bucking the trend here again because he's against the Crimean War. He wants to ease tensions and find mutual interest with Russia the same way he did with France. Remember, with the beginning of the Crimean War, you've got Britain and France basically vying with Russia for control of the Black Sea and control of the Crimea. And it's Cobden who pushes back against this. So, what can we make of Cobden and his life? Well, he's often labelled a classical liberal, and he's a classical case study in liberalism. He's very committed to free trade and free enterprise. And you could see him in some ways as quite a conservative figure in this regard. However, he's a real visionary, and he does take on the aristocracy through the Anti-Corn Law League, and he sees free trade and self-determination of different nation-states and economic trade and cooperation between them as a way to avoid conflict and lead to global de-escalation. So he's a really radical figure in many, many ways. And it ties into a lot of the themes we've discussed on this channel before. Although he's into free trade and freedom of commerce, and he can be seen as a sort of rhetorical conservative, he's really very anti-militarist, he's very pro-freedom, he's very distrustful of the traditional landed and the military elites, and he wants to see different nation states resolving conflict and trading together in a harmonious way. Love to hear your thoughts on Richard Cobden and what you think of him. What do you think was Cobden's main achievement? Also, I'd love a bit of feedback on how you see this channel progressing. Would you like more videos on 19th century figures? Would you like more videos on liberalism? Would you maybe like slightly longer videos with more detail? Or perhaps slightly shorter videos, a bit more to the point? Let me know in the comments section below what you would like to see History in a Nutshell doing in the near future. Have a great day.